Hello there, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. This is our second video now where we're going to look at a bit deeper at the theology of hope and the idea of resurrection. Right, here we go. Last time we did this by looking at a novel by Dostoevsky, where he explores the idea that people can find liberation from the rubbishness of life through solidarity in their suffering, through relationships, through loving one's neighbour. And the reason why this is so important is because it means that liberation is no longer dependent on circumstances, which makes it true liberation, because it can be forged within the place of suffering, it can emerge from the place of suffering, and transform the place of suffering, because it's done through love. Right, now in this video today I want to explore a little more and look at the practical implications of theology of hope, because I talked about last time how it had a direct relation to our everyday lives, and I believe that this relation to our everyday lives is seen quite clearly in the idea of social action, and so I'll be looking at joining the ideas of theology of hope, of resurrection, and social action. That's the direction I'm going in, moving towards social action, and hopefully it will be interesting and encouraging at the same time. That's my hope. Right, do you see that? That's my hope. Wicked. Right, I'm going to stop messing around now. I'm really going to get into it. The goal of Christian hope, where it's moving towards, is characterized by the resurrection of Jesus. Okay? Now the resurrection of Jesus emerged from, was preceded by, finds its ground and basis in a death in which Jesus identified with suffering, death and injustice. In the same way, the realization of Christian hope does not come from an escapism from the hardships of human existence. Christian hope is not an escapism. Rather, it embraces suffering, and it does so with other people. It does so, it looks to work through suffering with others, finding a solidarity with them, building relationships with others, and in that place find new life together with other people. Now I'm obviously emphasizing this kind of communal aspect here of finding resurrection life together, and it might be worth noting that this is at heart the idea of the Christian church. Salvation is not just something to be held to the individual within Christianity. But in Christianity there's always an outworking of what happens in one's own personal life. When one finds solidarity with Christ in his sufferings, the implication is that that individual then goes and finds solidarity with others in their sufferings, and in that place shows love to them, so that Christian salvation can be something inclusive. Now, so just as Jesus identifies with mankind's situation and his situation on the cross, so Christians are to identify with those outside of the church and within the church. There's a very communal aspect there. The church is a foreshadowing of resurrection life. Right, what else do I want to say? Right, so yes, to summarise, the goal of Christian hope finds its basis in an act of identification. Okay, God's salvation of the world is something which at one and the same time atones for sins and identifies with sinners in their predicament, in their situation where they are, and the suffering that involves, the hardship of living an imperfect life, as it were, and all the consequences that brings. Okay, so if the Christian theology of hope finds its ground and basis in death and suffering, works through that to transform that, then so when Christians preach their message of hope, they must also in some way identify with those to whom they are preaching the message. This is done through social action. This is done through Christians taking on the burdens of others, but being with them in their situation, in their shoes, identifying with them. And in this place they are to show love. In this place they are to unite the idea of loving God and loving one's neighbour. In Jesus, the two happen together. Why? Because in Jesus, God has become our neighbour, right by our side, in our shoes, on the cross, knowing what suffering is, knowing what injustice is, and knowing what it's like to face sin. Thus, the Christian life should do likewise, should do the same. Hope you like that, guys. My next video, by the way, in my next video I hope to cover the idea of how God's salvation applies to individuals who cannot have solidarity with others because they're isolated on their own. I've been emphasizing quite a lot how liberation may be found through unity with other people in their situation, and that is not dependent on circumstances, which is what makes Christian liberation so great. However, what does this mean for people who are genuinely on their own? God loves them too, and I hope to show you how theology caters for those people just as much, and it all comes from the cross. It all comes from the cross, and yeah, look forward to it. Look forward to it. How does God help the person who is isolated on their own? Catch you later, guys and girls. Bye.